The wind howled like a wounded beast through the Colorado mountains, carrying with it a fury of snow that painted the world in shades of white and gray. February of 1885 had been particularly cruel, even by the standards of those who carved their lives from this unforgiving wilderness. The peaks loomed like ancient sentinels, their jagged edges lost in the storm clouds that pressed down upon the valley below. Clara Whitmore stood at the frost-covered window of her cabin, watching the blizzard rage. Her breath fogged the glass as she traced a finger along the ice crystals that formed delicate patterns on the pane. At 28, she was still young by most accounts, though the past 2 years had aged her in ways that didn't show in the mirror. Her auburn hair, once worn loose and free, was now pulled back in a severe bun that spoke of practicality rather than vanity. The black dress she wore had faded to charcoal gray from countless washings, but she wouldn't abandon it. It was her widow's armor, a reminder of what she'd lost and what she'd become. The cabin itself was modest but sturdy, built by her late husband Thomas with his own hands during the first year of their marriage. Pine logs fitted tight against the weather, a stone chimney that drew well, and a roof that kept the snow at bay. It sat on 40 acres of decent grazing land, though the small herd of cattle Thomas had started was long gone, sold off to pay debts after his death. Now Clara kept only what she could manage alone, a dozen chickens in the coop out back, protected by thick walls and her vigilance, and whatever game her traps might catch in the woods beyond. She moved away from the window, her boots making soft sounds on the worn wooden floor. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, dominated by the large fireplace where a pot of rabbit stew simmered. She'd checked the traps that morning before the worst of the storm hit, finding 2 rabbits, enough for several days if she was careful. The rifle above the mantel caught her eye, as it did countless times each day. Thomas's Winchester, cleaned and loaded, ready for trouble that might never come, or might arrive any moment. Clara ladled stew into a bowl and sat at the rough-hewn table, eating mechanically while her mind wandered. The townsfolk in Millfield, 8 miles down the mountain, still whispered about her when they thought she couldn't hear. Poor Clara Whitmore, they said, living all alone up there like some kind of hermit woman. Unnatural. Some of the women clucked. For a young widow to refuse their matchmaking attempts. The men were worse, with their lingering looks and thinly veiled suggestions that she needed protecting, needed a man's firm hand to guide her. They didn't know about the Colt .45 she kept in her apron pocket. They didn't know that Thomas had taught her to shoot straight and true, or that she'd learned other lessons in the years before she'd met him. Lessons written in blood and survival that proper ladies weren't supposed to know. They saw what she wanted them to see, a grieving widow, fragile and alone. The storm intensified as evening fell, the wind finding every small gap in the cabin's defenses and whistling through with icy fingers. Clara banked the fire for the night and was preparing for bed when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Voices carried on the wind, male voices rough with exhaustion or pain. She froze, hand instinctively moving to her pocket. In 2 years of solitude, she'd had few visitors, and none who arrived in the middle of a blizzard. Moving silently, she extinguished the oil lamp and crept to the window, peering through a gap in the heavy curtains. 3 figures materialized from the white chaos like ghosts. They stumbled through the snow, one man supporting another who seemed barely conscious. The third walked behind them, constantly looking over his shoulder. Even through the storm, Clara could see the dark stains on their clothing that could only be blood. Her heart hammered, but her hands remained steady. She watched as they approached her door, knowing she had seconds to decide. The Christian thing would be to help them. No one should be left to die in such a storm. But these were clearly dangerous men, and she was alone. The decision was taken from her when the lead man pounded on her door with a fist like a hammer. "Open up," he bellowed. "We know you're in there. We saw the smoke." Clara took a breath, slipped the small knife from her sewing basket into her sleeve, and arranged her features into an expression of frightened concern. She'd played this role before, in another life. She opened the door a crack, letting the wind push it wider as if she were too weak to hold it.
"Please,"
she said, making her voice tremble.
"what do you want?"
The man who'd knocked was massive, with a grizzled beard crusted with ice and eyes as cold as the storm. Behind him, a younger man held up a companion whose head lolled against his shoulder. All three wore heavy coats, but she could see the gun belts beneath, the worn handles of revolvers. "Shelter," the big man growled. "Our friend's hurt bad. You'll let us in, won't you? Christian charity and all that." It wasn't a question. Clara stepped aside, knowing resistance would only provoke them. They pushed past her into the warmth of the cabin, bringing the storm with them. Snow fell from their coats onto her clean floor, mixing with the blood that dripped from the injured man. The younger one, barely more than 20, had the wild look of someone who enjoyed violence. His eyes roved over Clara with undisguised interest before turning to help settle the wounded man in a chair by the fire. The third man, the one she'd seen looking behind them, was different. Older than the wild one, but younger than the leader, perhaps 35, with dark hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the hardness etched into every line. He moved with economical grace, positioning himself where he could see both the door and windows. "Finch, check the back rooms," the big man ordered the young one. "Make sure we're alone." Clara forced herself to wring her hands. "There's no one else. My husband. He passed 2 winters ago." "Convenient," the leader said, pulling off his coat to reveal a shirt splattered with blood. "Not his own," she noted. "Name's Roy. That's Finch doing the searching. And this here's Calder." He gestured to the quiet man. "Our friend with the extra hole in him is Jake." Jake groaned, clutching his side where blood seeped between his fingers. A bullet wound. Clara recognized. She'd seen enough of them. "He needs help," she said, moving toward the injured man. "I have some medical supplies." Roy's hand shot out, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. "You'll help him." "All right, but first, you got any weapons in this place? Any guns?" Clara let her eyes dart to the rifle above the mantel, too obvious to deny. "Just my husband's Winchester. I don't really know how to use it." Finch returned from his search, shaking his head. "All clear. Roy, nice little setup she's got here." His grin was predatory. "Real cozy. Get the rifle down," Roy ordered Calder, who complied silently. "And you, woman, what's your name?" "Clara," she whispered. "Well, Clara, you're going to patch up Jake here, and you're going to keep us warm and fed until this storm passes. You do that, nice and quiet like, and maybe we'll leave you be when we go. Understand?" She nodded, moving to get the medical supplies from the shelf near the stove. As she gathered clean cloth and the bottle of whiskey she used for cleaning wounds, she caught Calder watching her. Unlike the others, his gaze was assessing rather than threatening, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. "I'll need hot water," she said, keeping her voice meek. "And more light." "Do what you need," Roy said, settling into Thomas's chair like he owned it. "But don't try anything clever. Finch here gets nervous when he's cooped up, and nervous makes him twitchy." He patted the gun at his hip. "You wouldn't want that." Clara set about tending to Jake, who was barely conscious. The bullet had passed through his side, lucky for him, though the blood loss was severe. She worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning and binding the wound while the men watched. None of them commented on how steady her hands were, how she didn't flinch at the sight of blood. "You've done this before," Calder said quietly. It wasn't a question. She glanced up at him, then quickly away. "My husband was a soldier. He taught me a few things." "Useful man," Roy grunted. "Shame he's dead." Clara bit back her response, focusing on her work. Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them all in together. She could feel the weight of their presence, the danger they brought into her sanctuary. But she'd survived worse than 3 outlaws seeking shelter. She'd bide her time, play the helpless widow, and wait. The knife in her sleeve pressed cold against her skin, a reminder that she was far from helpless. These men had invaded her home, brought their violence to her doorstep. They thought they'd found easy prey in a lone woman. They were wrong. As she tied off the bandage on Jake's wound, Clara allowed herself one moment to meet Calder's watchful gaze. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit. Then she lowered her head, playing her part once more. The night was young, and the storm showed no signs of breaking. By morning, everything would be different. She just had to survive until then. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the cabin as dawn broke, though the storm still raged outside. Clara had been up since before first light, moving quietly about the kitchen while the men slept. Jake lay on a makeshift bed near the fire, his breathing labored but steady. Roy had claimed her bed, while Finch sprawled on the floor nearby. Only Calder remained alert, dozing fitfully in a chair positioned to watch the door. His eyes opened as she approached with a cup of coffee, accepting it with a slight nod. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Clara was surprised by the gentleness in hands that had surely dealt death. She turned away quickly, busying herself with breakfast preparations. "You didn't sleep," Calder observed, his voice low enough not to wake the others. "Would you?" Clara kept her tone neutral, slicing bread with careful precision. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, I suppose not." Roy stirred, stretching like a bear emerging from hibernation. Well, the little woman's been busy." He helped himself to coffee, drinking it black while his eyes roamed the cabin possessively. "Finch, get up, you lazy pup!" The younger man groaned but rolled to his feet, immediately reaching for the bottle of whiskey Clara kept for medicinal purposes. Roy slapped it from his hand. "Not before noon. We need clear heads." "Clear heads for what?" Finch grumbled, but he accepted coffee instead. Clara served breakfast, bacon, beans, and biscuits, watching how each man ate. Roy wolfed his food down without appreciation. Finch picked at his, more interested in making crude comments about her figure when he thought she wasn't listening. But Calder ate slowly, thoughtfully, as if each bite might be his last. "This is good," Calder said simply. "Thank you." The courtesy seemed to irritate Roy. "Don't get too comfortable. Soon as this storm breaks, we're moving on." "To where?" Clara ventured, immediately regretting the question when Roy's eyes narrowed. "That's none of your concern. Woman, less you know, the better for you." She nodded, returning to the stove, but she'd already pieced together fragments from their conversation the night before. They'd mentioned a job gone wrong, someone named Morrison who'd double-crossed them, and there was the blood on their clothes. Too much to have come from Jake alone. The morning passed with excruciating slowness. Clara went about her daily tasks under their watchful eyes, feeding the chickens in the coop attached to the cabin, checking the water supply, keeping the fire stoked. Finch followed her everywhere, making her skin crawl with his leering attention. "Leave her be," Calder said when Finch crowded too close while Clara kneaded bread dough. "What's it to you?" Finch challenged, hand drifting to his gun. The tension in the room shifted, dangerous as a coiled rattler. Calder didn't move, didn't even change expression, but something in his stillness made Finch step back. "Easy now." Roy intervened. "We're all friends here. Ain't that right, Clara?" "Yes," she murmured, focusing on her dough. "See, the lady knows how to be accommodating. You boys could learn from her." Roy's smile was all teeth. "Speaking of which, Clara, you wouldn't have any more of that whiskey hidden away? For medicinal purposes." "Of course." She fetched the bottle, noting how Roy's hands shook slightly as he poured. Not from cold or fear. She recognized the tremor of a man who needed drink more than he'd admit. It was information to file away, perhaps to use later. As afternoon wore on, Jake developed a fever. Clara tended to him, changing his bandages and spooning broth between his cracked lips. The wound was infected. Despite her efforts, without proper medicine, his chances were poor. "He's getting worse," she told Roy quietly. "Then you'd better work harder to fix him." Roy growled, but she heard the worry beneath the threat. While she worked, the men talked among themselves. growing careless with their words. Clara learned they'd robbed a Wells Fargo shipment, expecting gold but finding silver instead. Morrison, their inside man, had betrayed them to the law. They'd barely escaped the ambush. Jake taking a bullet meant for Roy. 20,000 in silver certificates, Finch boasted. Hidden safe till the heat dies down. Shut your mouth, Roy snapped. But the damage was done. Clara now knew why they couldn't seek help in town, why they'd stumbled through a blizzard to a remote cabin. Evening brought no break in the storm. If anything, it intensified, wind howling like the souls of the damned. Clara prepared another meal, acutely aware of her dwindling supplies. 3 extra mouths were depleting stores meant to last her through winter. After dinner, Roy and Finch started on the whiskey in earnest. Clara watched Calder refuse drink after drink, maintaining his vigilance while his partners grew increasingly intoxicated.
You know what I think?
Finch slurred, pointing at Clara with the bottle.
I think our pretty widow here is lonely. 2 years without a man's touch? That ain't natural.
Clara's hand found the knife in her apron, but she kept her expression neutral. I manage well enough alone. Do you now? Finch stood unsteadily, moving toward her. Maybe I could help you remember what you're missing. Sit down. Finch! Calder's voice cut through the room like a blade. There you go again, acting all high and mighty. Finch wheeled on him. What is it with you and this woman? You sweet on her or something? I said sit down. Or what? Finch's hand went to his gun. You gonna shoot me over some... Calder moved faster than Clara's eyes could follow. One moment Finch was reaching for his weapon. The next, he was on the floor. Calder's boot on his wrist. Enough, Roy roared, struggling to his feet. Both of you. We got enough problems without fighting amongst ourselves. He glared at Finch. You keep your hands to yourself. We ain't that kind of men. Finch pulled free, nursing his wrist and shooting murderous looks at Calder. The atmosphere in the cabin grew thick with unspoken violence. Later, as Clara banked the fire for the night, Calder approached her. The others had finally succumbed to whiskey and exhaustion, their snores filling the cabin. I apologize for my associate, he said quietly. You have nothing to fear from me. Clara studied him in the firelight. And what about from them? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was thoughtful. Roy's many things, but he's got his own code. Finch, he shrugged. I'll handle Finch. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why do you care what happens to me? Calder was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, you remind me of someone I knew once, someone who deserved better than what life gave her. He turned away. Get some rest. I'll keep watch. Clara retreated to her corner, wrapping herself in a blanket. But sleep wouldn't come. She watched Calder's silhouette against the dying fire, wondering what story lay behind those watchful eyes. He was different from the others, still dangerous, certainly, but with a quality she couldn't quite name. Honor among thieves, or something else? Near dawn, she rose to stoke the fire. Calder helped her, working in companionable silence. As they arranged the logs, their hands touched again. This time, neither pulled away immediately. Why don't you run? He asked suddenly. When the storm breaks, why not leave this place? Clara considered her answer carefully. Finally, she met his gaze directly. I ran once, from something worse than you three. I came here to stop running. She paused, then added, This is my home. My husband built it for us, for the life we were supposed to have. I won't let anyone drive me from it. Something shifted in Calder's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. You're not what you seem, are you? Clara Whitmore. Neither are you, she countered softly. They stood there in the gray dawn light, 2 people wearing masks for different reasons, each recognizing something in the other. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Finch groaned in his sleep, breaking the spell. Clara turned away, busying herself with breakfast preparations, but she felt Calder's eyes on her, thoughtful and measuring. The storm still raged outside. sealing them in together for another day at least. Clara went through the motions of her morning routine, all the while planning. These men would leave eventually, one way or another. She just had to be ready when the moment came. The knife in her apron seemed to pulse with possibility. Soon, she promised herself. Very soon. The third day brought a brief lull in the storm, though dark clouds still pressed low against the mountains. Clara used the respite to gather more firewood from the pile behind the cabin, always under Finch's watchful and hungry gaze. She moved deliberately, stacking wood in specific places, adjusting the placement of tools, creating opportunities where none existed before. Inside, she went about her household tasks with the same careful precision. When she swept, she nudged the heavy iron poker closer to the doorway. When she arranged the dishes, she ensured the sharpest knife was within easy reach. Each movement appeared innocent, the fussy tidiness of a woman keeping house. But Clara was laying a battlefield. Jake's fever had broken during the night, though he remained weak. Roy's mood improved with his partner's recovery, making him careless. He'd taken to examining maps at her table, planning their route once the weather cleared. Mexico, she heard him tell Finch. We'll lay low in Sonora for a few months, let things cool down. Clara served coffee, noting the locations they discussed. The passes they planned to use would be treacherous even in good weather. In winter, with snow and ice, they'd be near impossible without someone who knew the terrain. Information was another weapon, and she gathered it carefully. That afternoon, while peeling potatoes for supper, her mind drifted to another kitchen, another life. She'd been Elizabeth Hartley then, 19 years old and married to a man who'd seemed charming until the wedding ring trapped her finger. James Hartley had been handsome, wealthy, respectable by day, by night. He was something else entirely. The memory came unbidden. James's hands around her throat, his whiskey-soaked breath. The moment she'd finally fought back, the kitchen knife had found its mark by instinct more than intent. She'd watched the surprise in his eyes fade to nothing, felt his blood warm on her hands. Self-defense. But who would believe a young wife over a dead pillar of the community? So Elizabeth Hartley had disappeared into the frontier, becoming Clara Mason, then Clara Whitmore when Thomas offered her a different kind of life. Thomas had never asked about the shadows in her eyes or why she knew how to hide bruises. He'd simply loved her, taught her to shoot, to track, to survive. And then he died defending their town from men just like these, leaving her alone with skills she'd hoped never to use again. You're burning the stew. Calder's voice brought her back to the present. Clara blinked, realizing smoke was rising from the pot. She quickly moved it off the heat, stirring to salvage what she could. Thank you. He studied her with those dark, knowing eyes. Where did you go just then? Nowhere important. She tasted the stew, adding salt to cover the burnt flavor. Just remembering. Dangerous thing, remembering. He moved closer, lowering his voice. Sometimes it's better to focus on what's ahead. Their eyes met, and Clara felt that strange pull again. There was warning in his words, but also something else. Protection? She couldn't afford to trust it, but couldn't quite dismiss it either. That evening, Roy's mood soured when he realized their whiskey was nearly gone. You must have more hidden somewhere, he accused Clara. No woman lives alone without keeping a bottle for the cold nights. That was all I had. Clara lied smoothly. There were 2 more bottles in the root cellar, but she'd be damned if she'd help them drink themselves stupid. Roy's face darkened, but before he could respond, Jake spoke up from his makeshift bed. Roy, leave it be. The woman's been more than fair to us. It was the most Jake had said since arriving. Clara brought him water, noting the clarity returning to his eyes. He'd survive, which meant they'd be leaving soon. The thought should have brought relief, but instead, she felt the pressure of time running short. After dinner, and strange tension filled the cabin. Roy paced like a caged animal. Finch cleaned his guns obsessively, and even Calder seemed on edge. Clara sensed they were waiting for something, or someone. Her answer came near midnight when she heard the distinctive sound of horses approaching. The men instantly came alert, weapons drawn. "Douse the lights!" Roy hissed. Clara obeyed, plunging the cabin into darkness save for the dying embers in the fireplace. Through the window, she could make out two riders struggling through the snow. "It's Morrison," Finch breathed. "That bastard actually showed. With company," Calder noted grimly. Roy cursed. "Get the woman. If this goes bad, we might need leverage." Finch grabbed Clara's arm, dragging her against him. She forced herself not to resist, even as his breath hot against her neck made her skin crawl. The knife in her sleeve pressed against her wrist. Waiting. The riders stopped just outside effective shooting range. "Roy Coleman," a voice called out. "This is Deputy Ewis, Marshal William Tanner. We know you're in there. Come out peaceful-like, and nobody else needs to die." "Like Jake almost died in your ambush," Roy shouted back. "I don't think so, Marshal. That wasn't supposed to happen." Morrison's voice came next, higher, nervous. "I tried to warn you, Roy, I swear I did." "Warning us after you sold us out don't count for much," Roy replied. Clara felt the tension ratcheting higher. These men were trapped, desperate, and she was caught in the middle. She tested Finch's grip, finding it looser than expected as his attention focused outside. "We've got the cabin surrounded," the marshal called. "You can't escape, but I'm willing to make a deal. Send out the woman unharmed, and I'll see you get fair treatment." Roy laughed bitterly. "Fair treatment at the end of a rope? No thanks. Marshal, the woman stays with us." In the darkness, Clara caught Calder watching her. His hand moved slightly. A warning? A signal? She couldn't tell. "Think about it, Roy," the marshal continued. "Is this how you want it to end? What would your mother think? God rest her soul?" Something in Roy snapped at the mention of his mother. He fired through the window, the sound deafening in the small space. Return fire erupted immediately, bullets thudding into the log walls. In the chaos, Clara made her move. She twisted in Finch's grip, driving her elbow into his stomach. As he doubled over, she pulled the knife from her sleeve and struck. Not to kill, not yet, but the blade found the meat of his thigh, sending him howling to the floor. "The woman!" Roy roared. But Clara was already moving. She rolled behind the heavy table as bullets continued to fly. In the confusion, she couldn't tell who was shooting at whom. Glass shattered. Cold wind howled through broken windows, and men shouted in pain and anger. Then, as suddenly as it started, the shooting stopped. "Hold your fire!" the marshal called. "Morrison's hit!" Clara peered around the table. Finch writhed on the floor, clutching his bleeding leg. Roy crouched by a window. Reloading, Jake had rolled off his bed, seeking cover. And Calder stood in the center of the room, gun drawn but not aimed at anyone in particular, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Clara," Roy barked. "Get over here, or I'll put a bullet in you myself." She emerged slowly, hands visible but ready. The knife was gone, lost in the scuffle, but she still had weapons if she could reach them. "I'm sorry about your friend," the marshal called, "but this doesn't have to end in more bloodshed. The woman's got nothing to do with your crimes. Let her go." "The woman stays," Roy insisted. He grabbed Clara's arm, using her as a shield as he peered out the window. "You want her safe, Marshal? Then you and what's left of Morrison get on your horses and ride away. Come back when the snow melts." "You know I can't do that." "Then we've got ourselves a standoff." Clara's mind raced. The marshal's arrival had disrupted whatever fragile balance existed in the cabin. Now, with Finch wounded and Roy desperate, anything could happen. She caught Calder's eye again, saw him shift slightly toward the door. "Roy," Calder said quietly, "maybe we should consider—" "Consider nothing," Roy snarled. "You going soft on me too? First Jake questions my decisions. Now you? Maybe I should have left you both to hang in Amarillo." The mention of Amarillo sparked something in Clara's memory. The Coleman gang. She'd heard Thomas mention them once. Brothers who'd turned outlaw after the war, leaving a trail of bodies across 3 states. But there'd been 3 brothers, and she only saw one here. Your brothers are dead. Mr. Coleman, she said softly. Continuing this won't bring them back. Roy's grip on her arm tightened painfully. What do you know about it? I know loss. Clara met his wild eyes steadily. I know rage, and I know it'll eat you hollow if you let it. For a moment, something human flickered in Roy's expression. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. Save your sympathy, widow. You'll need it for yourself if this goes bad. Outside, she could hear the marshal and Morrison arguing in low voices. The wounded man wanted to retreat. The marshal insisted on staying. Their disagreement bought time. But for what? Calder moved then. Just a step, but it drew Roy's attention. Where you going? Check in the back windows. They could be circling around. It was logical, but Clara heard something else in his tone. Calder was positioning himself, preparing for something. Their eyes met across the darkness, and she saw him mouth a single word. Ready. Ready for what? Clara tensed, prepared to move in any direction. The next few moments would determine whether she lived to see another dawn. She'd survived one violent man and built a new life from the ashes. She'd be damned if she'd let another take it from her. The wind howled through the broken windows, carrying snow and the promise of more violence. In the distance, she thought she heard more horses approaching. Reinforcements for the marshal or something else? Roy heard it too, his face twisted with rage and desperation. Everybody stays put, he growled. Anyone moves without my say-so, they're dead. But Clara could feel the situation spiraling beyond anyone's control. The careful traps she'd laid around the cabin seemed insignificant now against the forces gathering in the darkness. Still, she waited, watched, and prepared. Whatever came next, she'd meet it on her feet, fighting. The knife might be lost, but she was far from defenseless. These men had made a fatal error in underestimating her. Soon enough, they'd learn exactly who Clara Whitmore really was. The standoff stretched through the cold hours before dawn. Morrison had died sometime in the night. Clara heard the marshal's curses carry across the snow. Now only Tanner remained outside, stubborn as winter itself, waiting for his chance. Inside the cabin, exhaustion weighed heavy. Roy dozed fitfully by the window, jerking awake at every sound. Finch had passed out from pain and blood loss, his leg bound with torn sheets. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness, fever returning despite Clara's efforts. Only Calder remained truly alert, and Clara found herself drawn to his steady presence. He'd taken position by the back window, ostensibly keeping watch, but she noticed how he kept glancing her way. You should rest, he said quietly when she brought him coffee. So should you. She kept her voice equally low, not wanting to wake Roy. I've gone longer without sleep. He accepted the cup, their fingers brushing again. This time, the contact lingered. That was quite a move you pulled on Finch. Clara shrugged. He shouldn't have grabbed me. No, Calder agreed, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. He shouldn't have. They stood in comfortable silence, sharing the strange intimacy of the pre-dawn hours. Finally, Clara asked what she'd been wondering since their arrival. Why do you ride with them? Calder was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my younger brother Sam fell in with Roy's gang last year. Kid always worshipped outlaws, thought it was some grand adventure. His jaw tightened. Roy got him captured in Kansas. They're holding him in Fort Leavenworth, set to hang come spring. And Roy promised to help get him out? After this job, said the silver would buy enough guns and men to break Sam free. Calder's laugh was bitter. Should have known better than to trust a Coleman, but Sam's all the family I've got left. Clara heard the pain beneath his words, recognized it as kin to her own. Family makes us do desperate things. What about you? Calder studied her in the dim light. What makes a woman like you live alone out here, playing at being helpless when you're anything but? She considered lying, but something about the moment, about him, demanded truth. "I killed my first husband," she said simply. "He was cruel. One night, I fought back. Nobody would have believed me over him, so I ran. Thomas found me half dead in Denver, gave me a new life. Then he died too, shot by outlaws defending our town. Calder absorbed this without judgment. And now you're alone again. By choice this time." She met his gaze steadily. "I won't be driven from my home, even if staying kills you. We all die sometime. At least here, it would mean something." He shook his head slowly. "You're a remarkable woman. Clara Whitmore." "Elizabeth," she corrected softly. "My real name was Elizabeth, but she died with my first husband. Clara is who I chose to be." "Clara, then." He lifted his hand as if to touch her face, then let it fall. "When this is over—" "Roy!" The shout from outside cut him off. "Sun's coming up! Time's running out!" Roy jerked awake, immediately angry. "Still there, Marshal. You're a persistent bastard. I'll give you that. I've got a job to do." Tanner called back. "Just like you did before you chose the wrong path. Remember when you wore a badge? Roy, before the war twisted you up. Don't talk to me about the war." Roy's controls snapped. "You weren't there. You didn't see what I saw. Didn't lose what I lost." Clara used the distraction to move closer to Calder. "Whatever you're planning, do it soon. He's coming apart." Calder nodded slightly. "When I move, get behind the stove. The iron should stop any stray bullets." Before she could respond, Roy spotted them standing close together. His eyes narrowed with a sudden suspicion. Well, getting cozy, are we?" "Just keeping watch," Calder said evenly. "Sure you are." Roy's smile was ugly. "Think I'm blind? Think I don't see how you look at her?" He swung his gun between them. "Maybe that's why you've been questioning my decisions. Maybe you're thinking of selling us out for a piece of tail." "Roy," Calder started, but Roy cut him off. "Shut up. I'm done listening to you." He grabbed Clara roughly, pressing his gun to her temple. "Marshal, you want the woman? Come and get her." "Don't do anything stupid." "Roy!" Tanner shouted. "Stupid!" Roy laughed wildly. "Everything's already stupid. Morrison betrayed us. Jake's dying. And now my last partner's going soft over some widow's pretty face." Clara forced herself to remain still despite the cold metal against her skin. She caught Calder's eye, saw him tense to move. "Please," she said to Roy, making her voice tremble. "You don't have to do this. Everybody's got choices, woman. I'm just making mine clear." He raised his voice. "Marshal, you've got 1 minute to ride away, or I decorate this cabin with her brains. Roy, think about what you're doing." Jake's weak voice came from the floor. "This ain't who we are. We rob banks, not murder women." "We're whatever we need to be to survive," Roy shot back. The front door suddenly splintered inward. Marshal Tanner had used Roy's distraction to get close, kicking the damaged door off its hinges. His rifle swung up, aimed at Roy. Everything happened at once. Calder moved, faster than thought, his gun clearing leather, but instead of shooting the marshal, he turned it on Roy. "Let her go." Roy's eyes went wide with betrayal. "You son of a—" Finch, who Clara thought unconscious, rolled and fired from the floor. His bullet caught Tanner in the shoulder, spinning him around. The marshal's rifle discharged into the ceiling as he fell. Roy swung his gun toward Calder, but Clara was ready. She grabbed the hot coffee pot from the stove and flung its contents into Roy's face. He screamed, dropping his weapon to claw at his burned skin. Calder's gun roared. Finch jerked and lay still. Clara dove for Roy's dropped pistol, rolling behind the stove as bullets flew. She came up shooting, her aim true despite years without practice. Roy staggered, clutching his chest, then crashed to the floor. Sudden silence filled the cabin, broken only by labored breathing and the wind through broken windows. "Everyone alive?" Calder called out. "Still breathing?" Tanner groaned from near the door. Clara emerged from cover, keeping the gun ready. Roy lay motionless, eyes staring at nothing. Finch was equally still. Only Jake remained of the original gang, too weak to be a threat. She moved to check the marshal's wound. The bullet had passed through the meat of his shoulder, painful but not fatal. As she worked to stop the bleeding, Calder stood over the bodies of his former partners. "I'm sorry," Clara said quietly. "Don't be. They made their choices." He looked at her, something raw in his expression. "I made mine too." Tanner struggled to sit up. You shot them. Your own men. They weren't my men." Calder corrected. "I was just using them to get to my brother, but somewhere along the way," he glanced at Clara, "priorities changed." "There's still the matter of the stolen silver," Tanner said weakly. Calder pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Map to where it's hidden. All there except what we spent on supplies." He handed it to the marshal. "I know it doesn't buy my freedom, but maybe it counts for something." Tanner studied him with pain-glazed eyes. "You saved the woman's life. And mine, probably. That counts too." He struggled to focus. "I can't let you go. You know that." "I know." Calder holstered his gun. "Just give me a few minutes to help with the bodies. Check on Jake." The marshal nodded weakly. Clara finished binding his wound, then stood to face Calder. "So much to say. No words adequate. Your brother," she began, "will have to find his own way out. I can't save him by becoming like Roy." He touched her face gently, the gesture achingly tender after so much violence. "You showed me that. You reminded me there are still things worth protecting instead of destroying." "Calder. David," he corrected. "My real name is David Boone. Figure you should know that, since you told me yours." "David?" The name felt right on her lips. "What will you do?" "Face what's coming. Do my time. Try to build something better when I get out." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Maybe come back here. If you'd have me. I'm handy with tools. This place could use some repairs." Clara covered his hand with hers. "I'm good at waiting. Had plenty of practice." He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of promises neither knew if they could keep. When they parted, Clara saw Tanner watching with something like sympathy. "Help me get him on a horse," the marshal said gruffly. "Storm's breaking. Town doctor needs to see this shoulder." They worked together in the pale morning light, loading Roy and Finch's bodies onto their horses, helping Jake onto another. The sunrise painted the snow-covered mountains in shades of rose and gold, beautiful despite the violence it illuminated. As Calder, David, prepared to mount up, hands bound as a formality. He looked back at Clara standing in the doorway of her battered cabin. "I'll be back," he said simply. "I'll be here," she replied. Marshal Tanner, one arm in a makeshift sling, nodded to Clara. "You're a brave woman. Mrs. Whitmore, your husband would be proud." "Both of them, I think," Clara said softly. She watched them ride away until they disappeared into the trees, then turned to survey her home. Blood to clean, windows to board, a door to repair. But she was alive, free, and for the first time in years, she had hope for something beyond mere survival. The sun climbed higher, warming her face. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its morning song. Clara rolled up her sleeves and got to work. There was much to do, and possibly years to wait, but she was good at waiting. And some things, some people, were worth waiting for. The cabin felt cavernous in its emptiness. Clara had scrubbed the bloodstains from the floor until her hands were raw, boarded the broken windows, and rehung the door on its damaged hinges. But no amount of cleaning could erase the memory of those violent hours, or the ghost of David's presence that seemed to linger in every corner. Night was falling again. The first sunset since they'd ridden away. She sat by the fire, exhausted but unable to rest, when she heard footsteps on the porch. Her hand found the rifle, cleaned, loaded, ready, old habits. "Clara, it's me." She recognized the voice instantly, though it should have been impossible. David stood in her doorway, swaying slightly, his hands no longer bound. Behind him, snow began to fall again, gentle this time. "How?" She lowered the rifle, hardly daring to believe. He stepped inside, and she saw the bruising on his face, the torn clothes. Marshal Tanner's horse spooked about 5 miles out. Threw him. The fall. He shook his head. Broke his neck. Quick, at least. Clara absorbed this, understanding what it meant. No witness to the deal they'd made. No one to testify to David's cooperation. And Jake died before we reached the tree line. Fever took him. David sank into a chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. I buried them all. Seemed right to do that much. You could have run, Clara said softly. Taken the horses, the silver map, disappeared. Could have. He looked at her with those dark, haunted eyes. But I made you a promise. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. Clara rose, moving to heat water for coffee, needing something to do with her hands. She felt him watching her, the weight of unspoken words heavy in the air. What now? She finally asked. I don't know. He laughed, short and bitter. First time in my life I can go anywhere, do anything, and I don't know what comes next. Clara set the coffee before him, then surprised herself by taking his face in her hands. Now you rest. Tomorrow. We figure out the rest. His eyes closed at her touch. None of us deserve anything, she interrupted. We take what grace we can find. They moved together then, drawn by forces stronger than wisdom or propriety. His arms came around her, and she felt the trembling in his body. Reaction, exhaustion, need. She guided him to stand, led him to the bed that still smelled faintly of Roy's tobacco. Clara, he breathed against her neck. I'm not a good man. I'm not asking for good. She pulled back to meet his eyes. I'm asking for real, for honest. Can you give me that? Instead of answering with words, he kissed her. Not the desperate farewell of that morning, but something deeper, hungrier. Clara responded with equal fervor, her body remembering desires she'd thought buried with Thomas. They came together with an urgency born of violence survived and death cheated. Clothes were obstacles to be conquered, skin a territory to be mapped. David's hands were gentle despite their strength, reverent as they traced the curves of her body. Clara gave herself over to sensation, the heat of his mouth, the roughness of his beard, the solid weight of him above her. When he entered her, they both stilled, overwhelmed by the connection. Then need took over, driving them toward a release that was as much emotional as physical. Clara cried out, nails digging into his shoulders. As waves of pleasure washed over her, David followed, her name a broken prayer on his lips. Afterward, they lay entangled, breathing gradually slowing. Clara traced the scars on his chest. Knife wounds, bullet holes. A map of violence survived. Tell me, she said quietly. So he did. In the darkness, with her body curved against his. David spoke of his childhood in Missouri, a father who drank and used his fists, a mother who died young, leaving him to protect Sam, how he'd turned to guns and cards to feed them, each job leading to another until the line between right and wrong blurred beyond recognition. Sam was supposed to be different, he said, Clara's hair soft beneath his chin. Sent him to school, tried to keep him clear of my life, but blood tells. I guess he came looking for adventure and found Roy Coleman instead. Clara listened, understanding the weight of failed responsibilities. When he finished, she shared her own story in full, not just the killing of her first husband, but the years of terror that preceded it, the slow escalation from harsh words to bruises to broken bones, the miscarriage caused by a beating, the final night when she'd known it was her life or his. The knife went in so easy, she whispered, like cutting butter. He looked surprised more than anything, couldn't believe I'd actually done it. David's arms tightened around her. You survived. That's what matters. Did I? She turned in his embrace, needing to see his face. Sometimes I feel like I'm still running, still hiding, even here in Thomas's house. I'm playing a role, the helpless widow. You're the least helpless person I've ever met. His hand cupped her face. And maybe we're all playing roles. Question is whether we can choose new ones. They made love again. Slower this time. learning each other's rhythms and responses. David discovered that kissing the spot where her neck met her shoulder made her gasp. Clara found that her nails on his back drew sounds from him that were part pleasure, part pain, wholly satisfying. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they slept deeply, dreamlessly, two damaged souls finding peace in each other's arms. Clara woke before dawn to find David gone. Panic flared until she heard sounds from outside, the rhythmic chunk of an axe biting wood. She wrapped herself in a robe and went to the door. He'd cleared the snow from the porch and was splitting logs from her woodpile, working with steady efficiency. His shirt was off despite the cold, muscles moving smoothly under scarred skin. It was such a domestic scene, so at odds with the violence of recent days, that Clara's throat tightened. He looked up, catching her watching. "Figured I should earn my keep. I didn't save you for your wood-chopping skills," she said, trying for lightness. "No?" He embedded the axe in the chopping block, moving toward her. "What did you save me for, then?" The question hung between them, too large for the moment. Clara retreated into the cabin, David following. She busied herself with breakfast, aware of him watching from the table, comfortable in his partial undress. "We can't just pretend," she finally said. "You're still wanted. Someone will come looking eventually." "I know." He accepted the plate she offered. "Been thinking about that. And the marshal's dead. The gang's dead. Only ones who know I'm alive are you and me." He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. David Boone could disappear. Man could take a new name, build a new life. That simple? Nothing simple, but it's possible. He caught her hand. "Question is whether you want that life to be here." Clara considered. The cabin held memories both sweet and bitter. Thomas had built it with love, but he was gone. The violence of recent days had marked it too. Yet it was hers, the only thing truly hers in all the world. "I won't be driven from my home," she said slowly. "But home is more than walls and a roof." "What are you saying?" She met his eyes directly. "I'm saying David Boone is dead, but maybe Clara Whitmore could use a hired hand. Someone good with tools, like you mentioned. Someone who could help repair what's broken." Understanding dawned in his expression. Hired hand might turn into more, given time. Might, she agreed. If he proved reliable, trustworthy, worth keeping around. "That's a lot to prove. You've got time." She squeezed his hand. "We both do." They spent the day working side by side, boarding windows properly, fixing the door, erasing the evidence of violence. As they worked, they talked, making plans, sharing dreams neither had dared voice before. By evening, the cabin looked almost normal. They stood together on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. David had his arm around her waist, and Clara leaned into his warmth. "It won't be easy," she said. "People will talk, a widow taking in a drifter so soon after. Let them talk." He turned her to face him. "I've been running my whole life. Clara, from the law, from myself, from any chance at something real. I'm tired of running." "So am I," she admitted. "Maybe it's time we both stopped." He kissed her then, sealing the promise. When they parted, Clara saw a future stretching before them, uncertain, possibly dangerous, but theirs to shape. "Come on," she said, leading him inside. "Hired hand needs to know where everything is if he's going to be useful." "Yes, ma'am," David said with the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Whatever you say, boss." They went inside together, closing the door on the past and opening themselves to whatever tomorrow might bring. The cabin was warm, filled with the smell of coffee and wood smoke and possibility. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the last traces of blood and violence, blanketing the world in pristine white. A new beginning, Clara thought, for both of them. And this time, she was choosing it with eyes wide open. 2 weeks passed in strange domesticity. David had taken to calling himself Daniel Cartwright, a name bland enough to attract no attention. He'd trimmed his hair, shaved his beard, transformed himself into someone who might have been a farmer or carpenter rather than a gunslinger. Only his eyes remained unchanged, watchful and alert to danger. They'd fallen into a routine that felt both foreign and natural. Daniel, rose before dawn to tend the animals and chop wood. Clara cooked and mended, though she kept the rifle close and her knife closer. At night, they came together with a passion that seemed to burn hotter for the danger surrounding them. It was during the third week that trouble arrived. Clara was kneading bread when she heard horses approaching, multiple riders, moving fast. David appeared in the doorway, having heard them too. Without words, they moved into position. He took the Winchester, stationing himself by the window. Clara palmed her knife, arranged her features into those of a frightened woman. 4 men reined up outside. Clara recognized the lead rider, Sheriff Watson from Millfield, a hard man who'd never approved of her solitary life. With him were 3 deputies, all armed. "Mrs. Whitmore," Watson called. "Need a word with you." Clara opened the door part way, letting her voice tremble. "Sheriff, what brings you all the way up here?" "Looking for someone. U.S. Marshall went missing 3 weeks back, along with some outlaws he was transporting." Watson's eyes scanned what he could see of the cabin. "You seen any strangers?" "No, sir. Nobody since before the big storm." She wrung her hands convincingly. "Is it safe? Should I be worried?" "Woman alone should always be worried." Watson dismounted, approaching the porch. "Mind if we look around, just to be thorough?" Clara's mind raced. David was hidden, but a search would reveal evidence of 2 people living here. "Of course, Sheriff, though I don't know what you expect to find." Watson's smile was thin. "Never know what might turn up." He pushed past her into the cabin, his deputies following. Clara watched them track mud across her clean floor, opening cupboards, peering into corners. One deputy headed for the bedroom. "Ma'am," he called, "there's men's clothing in here." Clara felt rather than saw David tense in his hiding spot. "Those were my husband's," she said softly. I haven't been able to part with them." Watson studied her with skeptical eyes. "Your husband's been dead 2 years. Mrs. Whitmore. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. Sheriff." He grunted, continuing his search. They were thorough but not destructive, finding nothing immediately incriminating. Clara began to hope they might leave when one of the deputies spoke up. "Sheriff, boot prints out back, fresh ones, bigger than a woman's." Watson's hand moved to his gun. "That's so? Mrs. Whitmore, you want to explain?" Before Clara could answer, David stepped into view, rifle held casually but ready. "No need to bother the lady. I'm who you're looking for." The deputies went for their guns, but David's voice cut sharp. "I wouldn't. This Winchester's got a hair trigger, and I'd hate for Mrs. Whitmore's cabin to get any more blood on it." "Daniel?" Clara injected confusion into her voice. "What's happening?" Watson studied David with narrow eyes. "You're not one of the Coleman gang." "No," David agreed. "Name's Daniel Cartwright. I hired on to help Mrs. Whitmore with repairs after the storm damage. Been sleeping in the barn." He gestured with the rifle. "Now, why don't you boys ease those guns back into leather?" The tension stretched taut. Clara could see Watson calculating odds, measuring the distance between his men and David's rifle. "Can you prove you're who you say?" Watson asked finally. "Can you prove I'm not?" David countered. "Last I checked, it wasn't illegal to work for wages. It is if you're harboring fugitives. Or do I look like I'm harboring anyone besides this rifle?" Watson's jaw worked. Clara could see he suspected something but had no proof. Finally, he nodded to his men. "Stand down." The deputies reluctantly relaxed, though their hands stayed near their weapons. Watson turned his attention back to Clara. "Mighty convenient, you hiring help just when outlaws are running loose." Clara lifted her chin. "What's convenient about a woman maintaining her property? Or would you prefer I let the place fall apart and move to town where proper ladies belong?" The barb hit home. Watson had been one of the most vocal about her unseemly independence. "Just seems strange, is all." What seems strange, David interjected, is 4 armed men harassing a widow. Marshal Tanner struck me as a man who could handle himself. If he's missing, maybe you should be looking for him instead of bothering innocent folk. Watson's face darkened. You know Marshal Tanner? David shrugged. Heard of him. Most folks have. They say he was tracking the Coleman gang north, toward Wyoming. If I were looking for missing lawmen, that's where I'd start. It was a clever lie, mixed with enough truth to be believable. Clara watched Watson process this information. Maybe so, the sheriff said finally. But I'll be keeping an eye on things up here. Anything happens, Mrs. Whitmore, anything at all, you send word. Of course, Sheriff. Watson moved toward the door, then paused. Word of advice, Cartwright or whoever you are, this is a respectable community. We look after our own, but we don't tolerate trouble. You'd do well to remember that. I'm just here to work, David said mildly. No trouble from me. The sheriff and his men left, but Clara could feel their suspicion lingering like smoke. She and David stood silent until the hoofbeats faded into distance. They'll be back, Clara said. Yes. David set the rifle aside, pulling her into his arms. I'm sorry. I should have stayed hidden. For how long? Forever? She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent. We knew this was coming. We could leave, head west or south, start fresh somewhere else. Clara pulled back to look at him. Is that what you want? What I want is you safe. I'm not safe anywhere. Never have been. She touched his face. At least here, I'm making a stand. That night, they made love with desperate intensity, knowing their time might be limited. Clara memorized the feeling of his hands on her skin, the way he whispered her name like a prayer. When release claimed them, she bit her lip to keep from crying out, not wanting to voice the fear that this might be their last time. Afterward, they lay entwined, neither able to sleep. Tell me about the life you imagined, David said softly, before everything went wrong. Clara considered. Children, she admitted, a house full of them. Teaching them to read by the fire, watching them grow strong and kind. Thomas would have been a good father. You'll be a good mother someday. I'm 28. David, that someday is running short. He was quiet for a moment. If things were different, if I weren't who I am. But you are, she said gently. And I am who I am. We can't live on if onlys. No, he agreed. But we can change what comes next. Morning brought new challenges. Clara went to town for supplies, enduring the stares and whispers that followed her. At the general store, Mrs. Henderson cornered her. That man at your place, the older woman said without preamble. People are talking. People always talk. Clara replied, selecting flour with careful attention. It's not proper. A widow taking in strange men. Clara met her eyes steadily. Neither is starving because I can't maintain my property alone. Which would you prefer? Mrs. Henderson. The woman huffed but had no answer. Clara completed her purchases and left, feeling the weight of judgment on her shoulders. When she returned home, she found David in the barn, working on repairs. He'd removed his shirt in the warm afternoon, and she paused to admire the play of muscle under scarred skin. See something you like? He asked without turning. Maybe. She set down her packages. The whole town's buzzing about us. Let them buzz. He faced her, concern in his eyes. Did anyone threaten you? Just disapproving looks and lectures on propriety. She moved closer. I've had worse. He pulled her against him, heedless of his sweat-dampened skin. We're going to have to make a decision soon. Stay and fight the suspicion, or run and never stop looking over our shoulders. I know. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. But not today. Today, we're just Daniel and Clara, working the land, building something together. All right, he agreed, kissing her forehead. Not today. But they both knew today was all they might have. The shadows were growing longer, And Sheriff Watson wasn't the type to let suspicions lie. Soon, they'd have to choose between the life they were building and the freedom to live it. For now, though, they worked side by side in the barn, talking of mundane things like fence repairs and chicken feed. It was a small rebellion against fate, this pretense of normalcy. But it was theirs, and they held onto it with both hands. As the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of fire, Clara felt a strange peace settle over her. Whatever came next, she'd face it with her eyes open and David by her side. She'd survived worse odds. But first, there was dinner to cook and a man to love. The rest could wait for tomorrow. The decision came at dawn a week later, arriving with the thunder of hooves and the glint of tin stars. Clara woke to David already dressed and armed, standing by the window. "How many?" she asked, reaching for her clothes. 8, maybe 10. His voice was calm, resigned. Watson brought a posse. They both understood what this meant. No proof was needed when a town decided on guilt. Clara dressed quickly, efficiently, her mind racing through possibilities. "The root cellar," she said. "You could hide." "No." David turned from the window, crossing to her in 3 strides. "No more hiding, no more running." He kissed her deeply, pouring everything they hadn't had time to say into the contact. When they parted, Clara saw acceptance in his eyes. "David." "Daniel Cartwright has no past to catch up with him," he said quietly. "Let me be him. Let me try to build something with you." "Sheriff Watson." The call came from outside. "We know you're in there. Come out peaceable." David squeezed her hand once, then walked to the door. Clara followed, her heart hammering but her hands steady. The posse spread in a semicircle around the cabin, rifles and shotguns at the ready. Watson sat his horse at the center, a satisfied look on his weathered face. "Mr. Cartwright," Watson said with mock courtesy. "Got some questions for you?" "Ask them," David replied, keeping his hands visible but relaxed. "A funny thing. Sent a telegram to Fort Leavenworth about them missing outlaws. Know what I learned?" Watson leaned forward in his saddle. "One of them, David Boone, had a brother there. Set to hang for murder." Clara felt David tense beside her, but his voice remained level. "Interesting. What's that got to do with me?" "Maybe nothing, maybe everything." Watson produced a wanted poster, unfolding it slowly. "This here's David Boone. Sketch is 2 years old. Man's got a full beard in it, but the eyes." He looked from the poster to David. "Eyes are harder to change. Lot of men have dark eyes. Sheriff." "True, but not many have that scar on their jaw. The one you can see clear as day now that you've shaved." Clara's mind raced. The scar. She'd noticed it their first night together. A thin white line usually hidden by stubble. Such a small thing to destroy everything. "You're making a mistake," she said, stepping forward. "Daniel's been nothing but helpful." "Ma'am, I'd advise you to step back." Watson's hand moved to his gun. "This is law business now." "The law?" David laughed bitterly. "Where was the law when Roy Coleman was terrorizing folks? Where was it when honest men got shot for protecting their own? So you admit you're Boone?" David stood straighter. "I admit I'm a man trying to change, trying to build something decent. Only thing you're building is a hangman's scaffold." Watson gestured to his men. "Take him." "No!" Clara moved between David and the guns. "You don't understand what happened here." "Clara, don't." David tried to pull her aside, but she stood firm. "Marshal Tanner died in an accident," she said rapidly. "His horse threw him. David could have run then, but he didn't. He came back here because—" her voice caught. "Because he promised?" Watson's eyes narrowed. "You saying you've been harboring a known outlaw? That's a crime. Mrs. Whitmore. I'm saying I've been giving a good man a second chance. Good men don't ride with the Coleman gang." "No," David agreed quietly. "They don't, but maybe bad men can become good ones, given reason enough." Something in his tone made Watson pause. The sheriff studied them both, Clara defiant and protective, David resigned but resolute. "Tell me what happened," Watson said finally. "The truth, all of it. Then maybe we can sort this out, David looked at Clara, a question in his eyes. She nodded, trusting him to find the right words. He told it simply: Sam's capture, the devil's bargain with Roy, the violent night in the cabin. He didn't minimize his own guilt or exaggerate his heroics. When he finished, silence stretched across the morning air. "You got any proof?" Watson asked. "Besides her word. The silver," Clara said suddenly. David gave Marshal Tanner a map to where it was hidden. "If you send men to look, could have drawn that any time." Watson interrupted. "Need more than that." One of the deputies, younger than the rest, spoke up hesitantly. "Sheriff, I knew Jake Morton, rode with him before he went bad. If this man says Jake died of fever, I'd like to see the grave. Jake had a distinctive belt buckle, silver with turquoise. His PA made it." Watson scowled but nodded. "All right. Where'd you bury them?" David described the location, and Watson sent 3 men to verify. The waiting stretched interminably. Clara made coffee, serving the remaining posse with steady hands while her heart raced. David sat on the porch under guard, accepting his cup with a grateful look. "Why?" Watson asked suddenly. "Why throw away your freedom for this?" David looked at Clara, then back at the sheriff. "You ever been nothing but a gun, Sheriff? Just a weapon folks point at problems? It's no way to live. And she changed that? She reminded me there was another way." David's voice dropped. "My brother's going to hang because I failed him. I can't save him, but maybe I can save myself." Watson chewed on this, his weathered face unreadable. When the deputies returned, the young one carried a distinctive belt buckle. "It's Jake's," he confirmed. "Found all 3 graves, just like he said." Watson dismounted slowly, approaching David. "The marshal's death, you swear it was an accident?" "I swear. Horse spooked at a rattler, threw him into some rocks. Nothing anyone could have done." "And the silver?" "Every certificate is where I said it would be. Blood money. I don't want it." Watson was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He holstered his gun. "Daniel Cartwright," he said formally. "I'm hiring you." "What?" Clara and David said simultaneously. "Town needs a deputy. Man who can handle a gun, knows how outlaws think, pays not much, but it's honest work." Watson's smile was grim. "Consider it a test. You want to prove you've changed? Do it wearing a badge." David stood slowly. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. David Boone is a wanted man, but far as I'm concerned, he died with the Coleman gang." Watson extended his hand. "Daniel Cartwright, on the other hand, might make a decent lawman, if he's willing to prove it." David looked at Clara, who nodded encouragingly. He shook Watson's hand. "I accept. Good. You'll need to come to town. Take the oath. Get settled." Watson's eyes moved to Clara. "Both of you, I expect, can't have my deputy living in sin." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Sheriff Watson, there's a justice of the peace in town, Mrs. Whitmore. Might want to pay him a visit." His tone brooked no argument. "This is still a respectable community." The posse departed, leaving Clara and David alone on the porch. They sat in stunned silence, processing the sudden reversal. "A deputy," David said finally, disbelief coloring his voice. "A husband," Clara added softly. He turned to her. "Is that what you want? To marry a former outlaw turned lawman? It won't be easy. Folks will talk. Might never fully trust us." Clara took his hands in hers. "I've been married to a good man who died young. I've been alone. Neither brought what I was looking for." She met his eyes. "Maybe it's time to try something different." "Clara Whitmore, are you proposing to me?" "Someone has to. You seem too shocked to manage it yourself." He laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "All right then. Clara, will you marry me? Take a chance on a man with more past than future." "Yes," she said simply. "But only if you promise something." "What's that?" "No more looking back. David Boone is dead. Daniel Cartwright has a life to build." He kissed her in answer, sealing the bargain. When they parted, both had tears in their eyes. They spent the day packing what they'd need for town. The cabin would remain their refuge, a place to return to when town life grew too constraining. But for now, they had appearances to maintain, respectability to earn. As the sun set, they stood together looking at the home that had sheltered so much violence and birthed so much hope. "No regrets?" David asked. "None," Clara assured him. "You?" "Only that it took so long to find you." They loaded the wagon as stars emerged in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, suspicious townfolk, the weight of a badge, the struggle to forge an honest life from a dishonest past. But tonight, they had each other and the promise of a future neither had dared imagine. It was enough. More than enough. "Ready?" David asked, helping her onto the wagon seat. "I've been ready my whole life." Clara replied, "I just didn't know it." He clicked to the horses, and they rolled away from the cabin, toward town and the life waiting for them there. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal, witnesses to all that had passed and all that was to come. The wheel of fortune had turned, transforming an outlaw into a lawman and a widow into a bride. Strange turns, perhaps, but no stranger than anything else in this wild land where redemption could be found in the most unlikely places. As they descended toward the lights of town, Clara leaned against David's shoulder. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that, she thought, made all the difference. 5 years had weathered Clara's face with laugh lines rather than worry, and the silver threading through her hair caught the afternoon sun as she stood behind the counter of Cartwright's General Store. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a customer she knew by footstep alone. "Sheriff's making his rounds early today," she said without looking up from her ledger. "Deputy Sheriff," Daniel corrected. Though after 3 years, Watson had all but handed him the full responsibility. "And I had reason to come by." Clara finally raised her eyes, noting the way he still moved with that careful grace, hand never far from his gun despite the peace that had settled over Millfield. "Oh. Willie Henderson's in town, asking questions about freight shipments coming through." His expression was carefully neutral, but Clara read the concern beneath. She set down her pen slowly. Willie Henderson. She knew that name from the old wanted posters. Another ghost from David Boone's past, though this one still drew breath. "He recognize you?" "Don't think so, but he's got that look. Trouble coming to roost." Daniel moved closer, voice dropping. "Might be time for that visit to Denver we've been discussing." Clara touched her belly, still flat but carrying their secret, the child they'd begun to hope for after 2 years of trying, running again. Being smart. There's a difference. The bell chimed again. Clara's hand found the pistol beneath the counter as naturally as breathing, but relaxed when she recognized Mrs. Patterson and her daughter seeking fabric. Daniel tipped his hat to the ladies, playing the respectful lawman perfectly. "I'll see you at home," he told Clara, the words carrying weight. She nodded, turning her attention to her customers while her mind raced. They'd built something good here, the store, Daniel's position, even a tentative acceptance from the townspeople, but the past had long shadows, and Willie Henderson was the type to follow them. That evening, Clara climbed the stairs to their apartment above the store, finding Daniel cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. The badge on the table caught lamplight, a symbol of the life they'd constructed from ashes and hope. "Tell me," she said simply. "Willie rode with me and Sam before the Coleman gang. Knows things, if he puts pieces together." Daniel set the rifle aside. "I won't bring danger to you, not again." Clara moved behind him, hands on his shoulders. "We've weathered worse storms. Not with a child coming." The words hung between them, acknowledging what they'd only whispered in darkness until now. Daniel turned, pulling her onto his lap, hand splaying protectively over her middle. "I can't lose you," he said roughly. "Either of you. Then we don't let that happen." Clara framed his face with her hands. "Willie Henderson's just one man. You're a deputy sheriff with the town's backing. It's not 5 years ago." "No," he agreed. "I'm softer now. Slower.
Got more to lose. Got more to fight for, she corrected. They held each other in the lamplight, drawing strength from proximity. Below, the town settled into evening routines, families gathering for supper, shops closing, the saloon beginning its nightly revelry. Normal life. The kind they'd fought to claim. A knock interrupted the peace. Daniel was on his feet instantly, gun in hand, positioning Clara behind him. Old habits died hard. "It's Watson," came the gruff voice. Daniel relaxed marginally, opening the door to admit the sheriff. Watson looked older these days, worn by the job and the bottle he thought no one knew about. "We got a problem," Watson said without preamble. "That Henderson fellow's been talking to folks, asking about you specifically. Daniel, seems he heard about a deputy who's real handy with a gun. Got curious." "What'd you tell him?" "Nothing, but others might not be so careful." Watson's eyes moved between them. "Maybe it's time I took that vacation I've been putting off. Head to Denver for a few weeks. Shame you'd have to stay here and mind the town alone." The offer was clear. Watson would leave, giving them cover to disappear if needed. After 5 years of proving himself, Daniel had earned that much loyalty. "Appreciate it, Sheriff," Daniel said quietly. "But I'm done running." Watson studied him. "You sure about that? Man like Henderson doesn't ask questions for fun, I'm sure." After Watson left, Clara found Daniel standing at the window, watching the street below. "You meant that? About not running?" "Every word." He turned to her. "This is our home, our life. I won't let Willie Henderson or anyone else take it." "Then we'd better be ready." The next morning brought Willie Henderson to their store. Clara recognized him instantly, lean and predatory, with eyes that missed nothing. He browsed the shelves with feigned interest while she maintained her shopkeeper's smile. "Nice establishment," Willie commented. "You and your husband build this up yourselves?" "We did," Clara replied evenly. "He around? Like to meet a man who could tame Clara Whitmore." At her sharp look, he smiled. "Oh, I remember you. The widow who lived alone up the mountain. Folks talked about you plenty. How you took in that drifter right after the Coleman gang died. Real convenient timing." Clara's hand drifted toward the counter's hidden pistol. "My husband's a respected member of this community, Mr. Henderson. I'll thank you not to imply otherwise." "No implication intended." Willie picked up a tin of tobacco, examining it closely. "Just curious how a drifter becomes a deputy so quick. Takes a special kind of man, or maybe a familiar one." The shop door opened, and Daniel entered with perfect timing. He'd removed his badge. Clara noticed, but his gun sat easy on his hip. "Help you with something?" Daniel asked mildly. Willie turned slowly, eyes scanning Daniel's face with recognition dawning. "Well, I'll be damned. David Boone. Heard you were dead." "You heard right," Daniel replied. "David Boone died with the Coleman gang." "That's so?" Willie laughed, cold and sharp. "Funny how dead men walk around enforcing law. Sam know his brother's playing lawman?" Daniel's expression never changed, but Clara saw his hand shift slightly. "Sam's got his own path to walk. In prison. While you're here playing house." Willie stepped closer. "Wonder what the good people of Millfield would think, knowing their deputy rode with outlaws, knowing the things you did. The sheriff knows my past," Daniel said quietly. Made his peace with it. "But do they?" Willie gestured toward the street. "All those respectable folks who trust you with their safety, who let their children wave when you pass." His smile was cruel. "Maybe they should know the truth." Clara moved from behind the counter, standing beside Daniel. "The truth is that people can change, Mr. Henderson. That redemption is possible for those who seek it." "Pretty words from a pretty lady?" Willie's eyes glittered dangerously. "But I know different. Men like us don't change. We just hide better." "What do you want?" Daniel asked directly. "Now that's the question." Willie set the tobacco tin on the counter with deliberate care. "See, I'm putting together a job. Big one. Could use a gun like yours. Figured you might be tired of playing pretend. Not interested? No? Not even to keep your secrets safe? Willie shook his head mockingly. Be a shame if word got out. All this respectability crumbling down. Your pretty wife there, carrying your child from the look of her, cast out for lying with an outlaw. Daniel moved so fast Willie barely had time to react. One moment he was smiling. The next, he was pressed against the wall with Daniel's forearm across his throat. You come near my wife again, Daniel said, voice deadly quiet. And I'll show you exactly what kind of man I used to be. There he is, Willie wheezed. There's the David Boone I remember. Clara pulled Daniel back. He's not worth it. Daniel released Willie, stepping away. Get out. Leave town. Don't come back. Willie straightened his shirt, malice radiating from every line. This isn't over. You've got something good here. Boone, be a real shame to lose it. After he left, Clara locked the door and pulled the shades. Daniel stood rigid in the center of the store, fists clenched. He'll tell everyone, Daniel said flatly. Everything we've built will stand or fall on its own merit. Clara interrupted. The people here know you. Daniel, they know the man you are now. Do they? She took his hands, uncurling his fists. Sheriff Watson does. Doc Morrison, who you helped save during that outbreak last winter. The widow Martinez, whose son you taught to shoot straight. They know you. And when Willie tells them about the robberies, the killings, then we face it together, like we always have. That night, Clara woke to find Daniel gone. She discovered him in the store, badge in one hand, gun in the other, weighing them like scales of justice. I won't let him destroy what we have, he said without turning, even if it means becoming what I was. Clara moved to him, taking both items and setting them aside. You're not that man anymore. That man wouldn't hesitate, wouldn't consider consequences, wouldn't love like you do. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe Willie's right. We can't change what we are. No. Clara's voice was firm. I've been two different women in my life. I chose which one to remain. You've done the same. Morning brought the confrontation they'd expected. Willie had indeed talked. Gathering a crowd outside the sheriff's office, Clara and Daniel arrived to find Watson already there, badge glinting in the sunrise. Folks, Watson addressed the crowd. I hear there's been some talk about Deputy Cartwright's past. More than talk, someone shouted. That Henderson fellow says he's David Boone, an outlaw. Watson nodded slowly. What if he is? The crowd stirred uneasily. Clara felt Daniel tense beside her. 5 years ago, Watson continued, a man came to this town looking to change. He's served faithfully since, protecting you and yours. Does the name he was born with matter more than the man he's proven to be? He lied to us, Mrs. Patterson accused. Did he? Watson challenged. Or did he leave a past behind to build a future? How many of us came west to do exactly that? The crowd murmured, uncertainty replacing anger. Clara stepped forward. My husband made mistakes, she said clearly. He's never hidden that, but he's also saved lives in this town, protected your businesses, taught your children right from wrong. Judge him by what you've seen, not what you've heard. Pretty speech. Willie Henderson emerged from the crowd. But leopards don't change their spots. Do they, David? Daniel stepped past Clara, facing Willie directly. You want the truth? Here it is. I was David Boone. I rode with outlaws. I did things I'll answer for, come Judgment Day. He raised his voice so all could hear. But that man died in a snowstorm 5 years ago. Daniel Cartwright stands before you now, and he'll keep standing until you decide otherwise. The silence stretched taut. Then old Doc Morrison pushed through the crowd. I was a drunk, he announced. Killed a patient with shaky hands before I came here. You all took me in. Let me prove I'd changed. He looked around. We're a town of second chances. Always have been. Others began to speak, quiet admissions of past failures, of redemption sought and sometimes found. The crowd's mood shifted, communal understanding replacing mob mentality.
Willie Henderson watched his influence crumble. This isn't over. Boone. Yes, it is. Sheriff Watson stepped forward. Mr. Henderson, you're under arrest. For what? Got a telegram this morning. Seems you're wanted in Fort Worth. Murder and robbery. Watson smiled grimly. Funny how the past catches up. As Watson led Willie away, the crowd dispersed slowly. Some nodded to Daniel. Others avoided his eyes. But none raised hands against him. That evening, Clara and Daniel returned to the cabin for the first time in months. They stood where it all began, where violence had birthed unexpected love. Think we can weather this? Daniel asked. Clara took his hand, placing it on her growing belly. We've weathered worse. We'll survive this too. Together, always together. As sunset painted the mountains red, they held each other close. The future remained uncertain. Some would never trust Daniel again, and other ghosts might yet appear. But they'd faced truth and survived it, chosen love over fear, hope over hiding. Tomorrow they'd return to town, to the store and the badge and the life they'd built. But tonight, they were simply Clara and Daniel, David and Elizabeth, two souls who'd found redemption in each other's arms. The wheel of fortune had turned full circle, transforming outlaws into citizens, violence into peace, a house of death into a home of new life. And if that wasn't a miracle worthy of the wildest frontier, Clara didn't know what was. In the growing darkness, a meadowlark sang its evening song, the same melody that had welcomed her years ago after surviving the storm. This time, Clara sang back, her voice joining the birds in a hymn of gratitude and grace. They'd made it through, scarred but whole, tested but unbroken. And that, in the end, was everything. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. If you enjoyed this story of redemption and romance on the frontier, please let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We'd love to connect with fellow Western enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic stories of love, survival, and second chances in America's untamed territories. Share your thoughts on Clara and Daniel's journey in the comments. Until next time, partners.